I'm assuming that most of you are at least reasonably familiar with that passage, but one reason I wanted you to keep your electronic or paper Bibles open because I will be alluding to some things that you might want to just check out. First, what we want to look at is a question of leadership. In Genesis 24, and for the rest of that particular saga, we find a very interesting leader. And I think that there are a lot of things that you and I can learn from this episode. So leadership. Well, the thing is, if each one of us knew exactly what to do, when to do it, how to do it, where to do it, who should do it, and why we should do it, leadership would really be easy. Unfortunately, that's not the way our world operates. Each of us have some areas of ignorance in each one of these ones that I've noted up here in red. But we each need help in leadership for a number of reasons. We often misunderstand situations, and if you've ever been in a committee meeting, you're very much aware that in committees things get misunderstood. Sometimes you and I are overwhelmed by the amount of information and choices that we receive. I suspect many of you in the first year particularly felt like that in your first week of class. You were totally overwhelmed. You didn't know that you didn't know a lot, and all of a sudden you find out. Okay. Sometimes you and I will forget the goal, and we'll pursue some alternative that sounds good, feels good, but it's not what we were charged to do in the first place. Sometimes we allow our own personal whims and prejudices to get involved, and so we wind up making an excellent set of decisions and an excellent outcome on a project that nobody's interested in because we forgot the one we should have been doing. Sometimes we lack comprehensive knowledge. And I would say that more than likely for all of us, that's endemic, and that's most of the time. There's some knowledge that we'd like to have that we don't. Sometimes we forget our boundaries, and we understand that happens very often in the political world. Unfortunately, it happens in church environments as well. And sometimes we trust ourselves a bit too much. We've seen instances like this, I'm sure you have. Somebody is exceptionally good in a certain area of life, and it doesn't take long for them to get that ego bleeding over into areas in which they're really not qualified, but they think they are. So the Genesis 24 model, let's just look at some of the details. The leader in this instance is Abraham's employee. We don't know his exact status from the words in Genesis, whether he is perhaps a slave that rose to some leadership role or he was brought in as a business manager exactly. But we do know that Abraham gave him a single task to take care of. Now, that single task, however, had several aspects to it. Sometimes the expression is used, arms and legs, and things he had to take care of. He also understands that he has a superior. You know, sometimes we get the idea that if we're leaders, we report to nobody, and that is not true. All of us have people that we report to in due course. He understands several things. He understands the goal. If you read that passage again, now he does some discussion, and we'll talk about that. He knows there's a goal. Get a wife for Abraham's son. That's the goal. He understands the timetable. It's going to happen now. In other words, just as fast as we can get things together, that's where we're headed. He understands his authority. And actually his authority is considerable because he is choosing the young lady that will be coming into the family, and through that lineage, if Abraham's told him the whole story, then there'll be many blessings coming from it. He understands his authority. He does not have the right to do certain things. For example, he doesn't have the right to stop in, say, Damascus and sell all the stuff on the camels. He doesn't have the right to go to Egypt. He has a very specific thing that he has to do. He has to understand that there's a function. And I think that all of us understand that when we are doing things, we have functions to carry out. But my function doesn't necessarily make me in a higher position than you, but we have a function. So this no-name leader, and by the way, you'll never find his name in Scripture. It's very interesting. He knows these things, and these are very important in leadership roles. We need to know what the resources are that we can use toward a desired end. And, of course, we know there that he had 10 camels loaded with various and sundry things which would be considered worthy gifts and things which people would enjoy. So he had some resources. He also had the authority of Abraham has given him to carry out a function, and that's certainly a resource. He also knows that he has to direct his actions toward a certain result. For example, he's got 10 men going with him with the camels, and he has to find a way to get them there safely. And if you read the text, apparently the trip from Canaan to Haran is totally uneventful because it's not even mentioned. He understands that whatever he does will involve a lot of different people, and in some cases it will involve a considerable change for a few. His authority and his control, well, he has the authority given to him by his superior. And again, we don't ever want to get the idea that if we're leaders that we're free agents. We are not. He also understands the culture because he lives in Abraham's tent city, and he understands the culture there. And if I'm right in assuming this, he also knows the culture in Haran to some extent because the ones he's supposed to go see are of the same lineage. He also understands what the results of failure would be, that the lineage will not continue in the way that Abraham wants, that God has promised. So he understands very clearly that this is a job that has to be done. Now, also, when you talk about leadership, it's very important to break things down. The unnamed servant is given a task. He has a specific task. Now, accompanying that particular task, there are a lot of side issues, as I've already mentioned. He did what any prudent leader will do. He asked some questions. What are my boundaries? What are your expectations? And what is my fallback position when something comes up? So he understood the expected results, and that is, we'll get a bride for Abraham's son. He organized his team. Again, we don't know their names either. We know there are 10 camels. And if any of you have been around camels, you understand that we use some words in our culture talking about stubborn as a donkey or stubborn as a mule. I think camels top the list. So he organized the team. He had to have men he could trust, men who would not cause trouble, who would cooperate, were physically able, and would understand the possible consequences for failure. He prayed for God's intervention. I think that's something that every leader needs to be doing because we run into things sometimes that are totally beyond us. He was very cautious about his outcome. You notice that as he departed from Abraham, he did not say anything about, I guarantee success. Every now and again in the sports world, you hear somebody that gets a bit too full of himself and he starts forecasting victory. I think the pattern is they usually lose. He also knew when to move confidently because of the episodes that we run into when he arrives at his destination. Upon arrival, and after the interesting situation, he prayed for a specific thing to happen, a specific series of events to happen. And the text says that before he finished praying, those events were underway. You know, you and I would like to have prompt answers to prayer. This one's really prompt. The answer came before he finished. He asked for the desired result. He asked others to make their own decisions because obviously what he wants is to take a young lady from Haran, take her back to Canaan, and that will be an effect felt in the households in Haran as well as in Canaan. So it has a wide-ranging decision. He was very clear. He prayed about the specifics, and if you look again at his prayer, it's remarkable how specific he was and how specific God answered it. He then carefully explained his quest to the person who was the host, and you can say, well, quite by accident, he wound up in exactly the right place at the right time with the right people. And I think really we have to back up and say, not by chance, God was involved. He then requested a binding decision because once the decision was made for the young lady to accompany him, and once he set the timetable for departure, things are going to start moving. He did set a deadline, and it surprised the people at Haran considerably. All of his men carried out their tasks very quietly and efficiently because we hear nothing of them. And so that means sometimes when we do a good job, nothing will be said or done, whereas if we foul up, yes, there will be a lot of comments. So sometimes silence is a bit of a commendation. There was unity in his camp. Remember, they had a lot of very costly gifts on those camels, and it would have been relatively easy for some guy to hijack one of the camels and head off into the sunset. Well, that didn't happen. But again, I want to point out, as a leader, he was very clear about his expectations. People could not misunderstand him. And sometimes when you and I give people expectations, sometimes we're not clear, and we wind up creating confusion. We need to be very, very clear about what we expect. The result, well, success. The bride was secured. And then, again, when they departed, the text gives us no information at all about the travel from Haran back down to Canaan, but we do find out that when he's getting close to where Isaac lives, that the bride-to-be sees in a distance this man, and of course the man then sees in a distance the camels and the people. And when they approached, the servant did not keep control. He wisely handed over the bride, and he opted out of his obligations because he had completed them. He did not intend to retain that dominant leader role because that would not be appropriate. So what do we understand? This no-name man, he fulfilled a valuable role with eternal significance. He stayed within his boundaries. We don't know his name. We don't know if he ever got any accolades. But we do know that when he finished, what he did achieve has led to countless blessings for multiple millions of people, including us here today. So in our service in the kingdom, I think this servant's a good man to remember. He showed wisdom, and again, some of us have more wisdom than others, but if somebody ever claims that they have all the wisdom they need, I would suggest you run, because they don't. He was aware of the situation. He had his faculties open to understand what's going on. He had a conviction. He was bold when it came to the time to do his job. Apparently the rest of the time he's very quiet behind the scenes. But he stepped forth when it was needed, and then he stepped back into the shadows again. He did rely upon God, and from everything we understand, he was a very faithful servant to Abraham and did what he was asked to do. You and I are in a similar situation. We're on assignment from our Father and our Savior. We're not to self-initiate a bunch of stuff just because it feels good to us. We need to always go back to what's in the text and what wise people who are older than us, better trained than us perhaps, to give us some guidance and insight into what we ought to be doing. Thank you.